I'm here to tell my story and share my story about survival from human trafficking, and just want people to understand my truth. A lot of people depend on the myths for their information, whatever they see on social media or a movie or something like that. And so they draw ideas about what it might be for someone to experience some of the things that I've experienced. It seems otherworldish, like maybe this happens outside of the US, or maybe, this doesn't happen exactly like it's over sensationalized or something like that. But it's a very real reality and it happens all around us. And I'm really here to just share what it's really like to be a survivor of human trafficking. My story is an example of how it happens here. It happens closer than you think. It happens every single day. And so there's tons of statistics surrounding it, but when you look at people who've actually gone through it, we prefer not to be counted as a statistic. It's very personal, this type of journey coming out of human trafficking and living life and trying to pick up all of the broken pieces of that. After I came out of human trafficking, I spent a lot of years just loathing life, feeling like a misfit, just in this quagmire of mental mess. So just imagine a plate of spaghetti and meatballs, and my life was just very intertwined and unstable. Although a lot of people who got to know me over the years felt like, because I put my best foot forward, put my face on, tried to put a smile on my face, but internally I was just in such turmoil, dealing with the realities of what happened in my life. And so, teenage runaway, a lot of domestic violence was in the house. My father being in the military, my mother being a military wife. I have a brother who's 5 years my senior, and just, I already began life having to hide and play a role with the domestic violence being in the house. There was alcoholism, there was drug use. My father was addicted to drugs and alcohol as a result of being a Vietnam vet. And so it was just inevitable that I would perceive life from such a traumatized place to begin with. And when everything that happened, it was just re-traumatizing in a different way. And so I felt hopeless many days, most days. And so recovering from some of the things that took place is still happening, and this is 29 years later. I was actually a homeschool student and spent a lot of time doing community work. I was very involved, not only in our church or the churches that we would live in, because being a military brat, we checkerboarded the U.S. I was born in Madrid, Spain, came to the U.S., checkerboarded, was in at least 9 different schools by the time I hit the 6th grade. And so I was always the new girl, always the one who was picked on. But I was not going to the principal's office. I was making good grades, doing very well. And then my parents decided, because we moved so much, to take me out of school. So I was a homeschool student. I was getting Youth of the Year awards at local organizations. I was writing part-time, contributing articles to a local newspaper. I was at city hall meetings and things of that nature. So I was by no means a troubled child. The running away happened after a very specific incident where my father, who was a recovering drug addict at that time and had lost his job, we were living in a condominium that was no lights. It was probably in the dead of winter, and we were hungry. We didn't have a lot of food, and I walked into a closet one morning. My father was in a fetal position, sweating, going through withdrawal. And we had a conversation. He snapped and threatened to kill me and literally told me that he would do that. And so my mother jumped in between the two of us, and it was a fight between the two of them. I ran out of the door and I called neighbors. They called the cops. They picked my dad up. 2 weeks later, I ran away from home. Growing up, my brother and I, we witnessed my mother being beat in very terrible ways. We would just wake up in the middle of the night and hear the screaming, the crying, the thuds. We'd see my mom the next day in a very broken state. She could not keep a job. She was a seamstress and ended up starting a business, but that was dismantled because of different things that my father assumed. And so he was mentally unstable from being a Vietnam vet. He grew up with a very tumultuous home life situation, and so just a lot of unresolved trauma. And so you add drugs and alcohol to that, and you have a recipe for a disaster. And so we grew up, my brother and I, in fear, in tremendous fear of my father, never knowing when something dramatic would happen. We moved around half the time, not because he was in the military. He eventually got out of the military, but because he was so sporadic and random, and we would just get, informed that, hey, in a couple of weeks we're moving. That happened so many different times that, you lose friends. This is before social media. This is before all of that. So you try to write people, but you forget, you lose things, and there's no backup. And pretty much for my brother and I, we were all we had, and we had my mom. And so we just kind of clung to her in most cases. But this time when I decided to leave, my brother was away in school, and it was just me and my mom. And I really feared for my life. I feared that somebody in this house is going to die. And when he said that to me that morning, I believed him. And I didn't want to stick around to see him fulfill that promise. And so to make a decision like that, I was already used to moving around. And so that was not hard for me. I had actually been thinking about it for years at that point. I couldn't wait to find a way of escape. But being so young and not having, a job or adequate support or anything like that, I just couldn't figure it out. But at that point, it was life or death. And so at that point, figuring it out, I was like, I'll have to do that later. I have to get out of here. And as much as I love my mom, I felt like she's going to have to take care of herself because I just can't. I can't. I'm not prepared to care for her in the way that she needs. And so I carried a lot of guilt in my heart after leaving home. I really did. Because I wondered, when was I going to get the news that she was dead? Or, I just wondered. And so when I ran away, I moved from Dallas, Texas to Atlanta, Georgia. 16 years old. I had a $119 Greyhound bus ticket. And I had met a guy on a plane. I was actually visiting friends. And I'd met a guy on a plane, and we befriended each other. He was 27 years of age. And when I told him what I was going through, he said, I live in Atlanta, and anytime you need a place to stay, you're more than welcome to stay with me. Well, I didn't have anyone that I knew, and it wasn't about trust. That didn't matter as much as someone promised to give me another option, and I took it. And so when it was time to leave, I stayed a couple of weeks with a friend of mine who she was in college and working, and she had a place on her own. And so I stayed a couple of weeks with her while I figured out, and I made the call. And this guy said, come on. And so I got my ticket. At the time, I was working a couple of different part-time jobs, and I just got my money together, got my ticket, and I left town. And so when I moved there to Atlanta, it was actually very short-lived with this guy because there was just a comedy of errors and lies that he had told. And I was naive. I didn't realize what game was and that it was being run down on me or anything. But when I began to put two and two together, It just didn't add up. And so, in the midst of all of that, just some really crazy things happened. He had taken me to a nightclub not too long prior to me being put out of the house. And so I faced yet another tough decision to leave. But I was resourceful, very naive, but very resourceful. And I met a guy at the club that we went to, and we had exchanged information. Well, actually, I got his telephone number. I didn't give him mine because I didn't have one. They didn't have cell phones, so I just took his telephone number. And some crazy events happened. I was told that I had to leave, and so I called this other guy, and I just told him, listen, there's a bad situation going on. I need a place to stay. Is it possible? Do you know anybody? And he actually told me, you know what? I know exactly who can help you. And I'm just like, what kind of luck do I have? I mean, I have now, I'm in another city. I couldn't go back. Going back to Dallas was out of the question. But I'm thinking, man, I struck the jackpot, because when he tells me who he works for, it's like a jaw-dropping moment. He worked for one of the most famous, wealthy music producers, very young guy, R&B music producer, and he's like, you're going to be just fine. Why don't you let me introduce you? And so, he picked me up. I left one guy's house who was practically a stranger, and I went to another who was literally a complete stranger. And then I met him. I met the producer and his entourage. And he asked me just a few questions, hey, I know you need a place to stay, but would you be willing to hook my boys up, is how he put it. And I'm like, okay. And he said, well, if you're going to live here, you're going to have to hook my boys up, and we'll take care of you. You want to be in music videos, you want to go shopping, you want to do these different things, you want to roll with us, then hook my boys up and I'll take care of you. And that's exactly what happened. And so I spent a little bit over 6 months, 6 or 7 months, something like that. Appeared in 2 music videos. He made good on his promises. But I was initiated, if you will, into that lifestyle through a very brutal gang rape. And so they got me drunk. I experienced marijuana for the first time. And the attack was so brutal that it took me about 2 weeks to recover. I remember one of his bodyguards threatening me and telling me he had these teardrops tattooed on his eye. And he said, don't become a teardrop. You can't talk about this to anybody. And I was terrified, but I knew that if I wanted to somehow change my life, maybe this was my only option. See, with the years of abuse that my mother endured and that we endured around my father, we were very isolated from family. So I was already a homeschool student. I had been a homeschool student over a year by that point. We had moved from Tulsa, Oklahoma to Dallas, Texas. So I didn't really have a strong system. I didn't have truancy officers looking for me because I had never enrolled in school there. I was at the homeschool program. And so that's where my mother and father took care of all of that. So there were no administrators checking on me or anyone who would know that I was missing, that I needed to be checked up on, except for my mother and my brother. And I spent a long time lying to them about what I was going through because it was so shameful. I couldn't imagine telling my mom how I was living, so I just made up all kind of things because it was deplorable. And so I was just passed around from individual to individual. I went to after party after after party, concerts, videos, and finally I knew something was like terribly wrong. I'm like, this can't be. I'm like, I'm thinking about all the different people that I was introduced to and all of the different, and I knew that they had money and means. And all I could think about sometimes was, don't they see, like, no one's asking me, well, what do you want to do with your life? Or it was just none of that talk. It was just constant abuse, you know. And the weird thing that I want people to understand is when you are threatened with your life, you make a lot of decisions that you probably wouldn't make if there were not that fear. Because I thought, I'm like, well, I can go to the police about this. But then it's like, okay, will that put me in more trouble because I'm not in school? You know, will I end up in some sort of home? Like, will I be in trouble because these are crimes? You're not supposed to be doing this. You're not supposed to be, you know, I knew prostitution was wrong. Like, I had the understanding of that, but I just felt so trapped. I just felt like I don't know what to do. And I couldn't call my brother and be like, can you come help me? Because then I'd have to tell him what I was doing. And it's like the shame, all these different things, the shame would consume me. And so I'm not going to sit up here and lie and be like, there weren't moments that I was just like when I was not being physically abused and, you know, we were just kicking back watching movies, or I was at the studio with them and I'm meeting entertainers. It was kind of fascinating from that standpoint. And so it's just a mixed bag of things that were going on. Finally, I had one of the girls who would come over and pretty much essentially do the same things. She encouraged me to leave. She's like, look, you don't need, she was much older than me. And I had confided in her because I thought, okay, this might be my way out. Because she would say things to me like, why are you here? Like, you know, you go to the clubs with us, but we know you don't have an ID to be here. You're there because you're getting in with the entourage. They don't card the entourage. I'm sorry. They know who's coming in the club. So why don't you come with me? And that's when things took a turn, because basically I went from one group who was exploiting me to an individual who seemed more someone that I could trust. It was a female, so I felt like she's going to help me. She gets this. She knows what's going on. But instead, she was just a madam. And so, you know, while she's there with them turning tricks, you know, she saw someone ripe. You know, I was the low-hanging fruit because I was just clinging to her. You know, she was kind, she was motherly, and she just took me out of that into more of the same. And so I lived, we kind of went from hotel to hotel, pillar to post, and then I got tired of that. And then there was just a point where I was just going from handler to handler. And at this point, I go from the innocent, hopeful young lady who had dreams and hopes and aspirations and wanted to make something of myself, to a very cold, angry individual in a very short period of time. And so my innocence at this point was just gone. There was no more innocence left. Now it's survival. Now it's like, I would say in the course of about a year, I just felt very hardened. I no longer felt the fear that I felt initially. I felt like this is just life. Life is hard. Some people do better and some people have my story. This is probably not going to get much better than this. And then that's probably the time that I decided to make it a profession. And so one thing that I knew for sure, I was tired of being handled. I was tired of other people benefiting. Like, I never actually received money, but I know money was exchanged. And so I'm like, you know, if I'm going to do this, then at least I should be supporting myself. I need to take care of me. And so I went from doing miniskirt contests and getting the money from that. to starting stripping. I started stripping, and I felt like a free agent. I had the manager of the club to worry about, maybe some other girls, but I didn't have anyone controlling me. And so it was success to me in that warped way. It was success because now I'm actually making the money myself. And so that's the life that I lived from about 1992 till about 1997. It was situational, but I was looking for help. And if someone provided or seemed to provide another way, it's not that I trusted so much, I was just so desperate. I was just so desperate. And so, you know, they talk about someone running game on you. Every game imaginable was run on me until I learned the streets. And I learned the language, and I learned what the propositions would look like, and I rejected it. I said, okay, no more of that. But I was always looking for someone to rescue me, someone to see that there was more going on than met the eye. But it took a very long time, I think, before I would reach the place of rescue. My mind's in 97 when I was walking around with suicidal ideation. I was walking around with homicidal ideation because I hated everybody. I hated everybody. I hated my dad. I didn't hate my mom. I just didn't know. It was so complicated. I didn't know how to tell her what I was really doing with my life. And she knew something was wrong, but I would just never let her into that place until 1997. And so in 1997, where I don't know why I never got to a place where I actually followed through with suicide plans, other than the fact that I was so terrified that it would go terribly wrong. I overthink things. I was so terrified that it would go so terribly wrong that I would be in a vegetated state, just playing and replaying why this never worked out right. Or, I remember trying to, and this is not funny, so please forgive me, but I remember trying to walk out in front of a car, and I remember counting, okay, the sixth car, I'm walking out. I'm trying to get hit. I'm trying to end it all. And then the sixth car, it was a baby blue Rolls Royce with white leather seats. I was like, this is too beautiful. It was a drop top. And so I can't ruin this individual's car. And so it's like, okay, count six more. I count six more. And it's like God is just like laughing at me. Like, because he knows me. I like beauty. I don't like pain. And, what if this goes wrong? And so I count six vehicles again. It's a Mack truck. I'm like, that's going to be, no, that's just too much. So it's like, I couldn't make up my mind which way to go. And so that never happened. But, so in 1997, I actually had a nervous breakdown, which it rocked my complete world. Because now I'm sitting up in the Elizabeth Emergency Care Unit in Elizabeth, New Jersey, on the 13th floor with so much Haldol and Risperdal in my system. I am drooling because they found me. There were all these reports that there's a woman. This is in New Jersey, Newark, New Jersey. There's a woman running in the middle of the street trying to get hit. I had snapped and lost my mind. And the police showed up and they took me to the psych ward. I was having a nervous breakdown. I was psychotic. I was suicidal. I was homicidal. I was a mess. And that was a saving grace because now they had to contact the family. They're like, do you have anybody that we can call on your behalf. And that's when I reached out to my mom. That's when I reached out to my brother. And that was the beginning of me telling them the truth about how I lived the past 6 years of my life. I remember my brother drove from Dallas, Texas to Elizabeth, New Jersey. And just seeing him, there were so many emotions. But it was the first time that I could say truly I experienced peace in a very long time, because I knew he loved me. I knew it was going to be difficult, but my brother, I knew how he was built. He was used to taking care of me. You know, he was used to being the one to dry my tears when things were happening in life that were only we shared that experience. No one else knew. Like, he knew what that was like. And so I felt like I could tell him what's going on. And I had no choice because I needed a place to live. So him and his wife at the time, they sat down in the office with the lady in administration who was releasing me. And she said, listen, she kind of leaned in and she said, leave the address blank, because we cannot release her in this condition to someone who does not live in the state. I don't know. I guess these were the laws in New Jersey, because they were actually trying to commit me to the city hospital, or the state hospital, excuse me. And finally, I confessed that I actually had relatives, and that stopped that process from happening. And so she said, leave the address blank. I'll fill that in. Will you please take her home? Take good care of her, because she doesn't belong here. So it was little moments like that that did a couple of things. It rekindled my curiosity and my childhood faith, because I felt like, man, any number of things could have happened. She could have been the one that's by the book. I could have been committed to a state hospital, but instead I was released home. I felt that was grace. And so there were little nuggets of hope that maybe, just maybe, I would not have to commit suicide. Maybe I could get over everything that I experienced. Maybe I could have a normal life. Maybe. And that was enough for me. And so I went with my brother and his wife. I moved back to Dallas, Texas. And then started my life over. I was 23, but mentally I had regressed. The state that I was in, the doctor said it was about 6 or 7-year-old child that they were dealing with when they were dealing with me. And so I was heavily medicated and just really in a bad shape. And so I consider my brother like the central figure at that time who I would say rescued me. It was a divine intervention, and I knew that it was orchestrated by God. And so the only thing that I knew to do, and he told me one day, he said, Keeya, I know you've been through a lot. Never once did he judge me. But he said, you know how we used to go to church when we were little? He's like, would you like to do that again? And I was just like, yes, because I was like a little child. So I was like, yes, I'd love to do that again. And he talked to me like I was his little sister. Never with judgment, just with love, like he's always done. And so we began going to church again. Slowly but surely, I was able to get a job. I'll never forget, from making anywhere from $1,500, $2,000 a week, to $89 every 2 weeks at Wendy's. But guess what? I had my dignity intact. So I was happy to cash that check, pay my 10% tithe, and my brother and his wife at the time helped me set up a budget. What was that? I spent all that I wanted, and the next day I just make some more money. But nope, I had to learn there's new rules to living normal, right? And so it was a lot of baby steps, just a lot of micro steps. And times I felt that I relapsed mentally in trying to step forward. And it was very difficult because I cut off everyone I knew. I didn't want to know anyone from the lifestyle. I became sober. I stopped drinking. I stopped the marijuana. I stopped the ecstasy. And I tried. I gave it my all. But mentally, that's where the real struggle began. So what it looked like was, first of all, I told myself a few things. I could never tell anyone what on earth I had experienced because I was so ashamed of myself. I was so ashamed of the things that I had done for money that we couldn't go there. So I had to figure out how to fit in. I've never done well with that. I've always been the new girl. I could never figure out how to fit in. And so that became my focus more than getting healthy. I wish I could say my mental health was more important to me, but it was really fitting in that was more important to me. And so eventually, after working with Wendy's, I eventually got a job working at a call center. I got very involved in the local church, doing a lot of missional work, started going through different classes, Christian women leadership classes, all of these classes where I could build some skills to fit in and hopefully get over everything that I had gone through. And that didn't work out so well. There were a lot of mental struggles, a lot of post-traumatic stress. I had some mental health labels now because when I went berserk in New Jersey, they said it was bipolar disorder. And later on, I would find out there was ADHD, and then later I would find out there was post-traumatic stress, and it's just like more shame, more labels, more to hide. So in hiding, I became the closest thing to normal as I could. I got married in 2002 to one of the pastors at the church. Yeah, go figure. I still don't know how that happened, but I did. And the children came back to back, and I had a place to hide. Because who is going to think anything too deep about the pastor's wife? I had the image that I wanted. It cleaned me up. It gave me a crutch. But there were many years of reckoning. It's almost like someone who has an alter ego. You see those alter ego shots and you see this real bad character and then you see this real good character. And so that bad character was my past. It was everything that I did. I understood and felt that God forgave me, but I felt people could never forgive me. So I couldn't talk about that. And the tension between living this life that looked so good on the outside, yet having this internal struggle was far too much to bear. And so it eroded my soul in so many ways, because I didn't even want counseling at this point, because then I have to admit all these things. So now I got to tell someone who's going to tell me how crazy I am because of all of these labels that I received at the psych ward. But eventually I had to. And you're talking about someone who mentored young people. You're talking about someone who served in the community, who gave back in many ways. But I had this secret life. And finally, I just started desiring to come out of that prison. So I began counseling. I began getting some help. And as I did, it was like a volcano erupted, because I finally accepted what happened. That landed me over several years in at least 5 to 6 mental health institutions as an inpatient. Coming to terms with what I experienced, I don't believe that it injured me. I believe that I just had so much bottled up inside that it became more and more difficult to hide it. I didn't want to hide it anymore. I really wanted to be free. And so that was the path towards healing. You know, I did believe, like I said, I was a woman of faith. I'm here married to a pastor. I believed that I didn't just experience all that pain to just continue to hurt. I felt like I can't be the only one who's gone through horrible things. I'd heard other people's stories. I'd heard people turn their lives around. What was the shame in that? And so, you know, just in little micro steps, as I got more counseling, I was definitely a woman of prayer. I prayed about it. I talked about it. I began to share and test what it would be like to tell someone who wasn't a licensed professional counselor what I really experienced. And so I had a couple of friends that I began to just share a little bit and see, okay, can they handle that? Do they freak out? Do they run away? Do they say I'm done? And then I realized that people started to tell me things like, you're really brave. I'd never heard that I was brave for having gone through that. After enough counseling, I began to understand that I was actually a victim, because I was so busy for so many years trying to hide what I'd been through, because I felt like I've done all these horrible things. I don't want anyone to think bad of me, but I began to realize, and then I began to read, and then I began to research. Oh, I was not the only one going through that. This is happening worldwide. And that began to pique my interest, because I'm like, what? So I became there was some righteous indignation. Like, it was horrible enough I went through it. What in the world are so many people going through this for? And with that, it was like the puzzle pieces started coming together, and the little micro steps towards telling my story here, sharing it over here, talking with young people, talking with small groups, and then it would get bigger. Finally, I decided, after my children were old enough, to just start having conversations about, what do you think? Because one thing that I did do is, when it was age appropriate, because I was terrified. I was terrified that someone would harm my children, especially sexually, or that they would put their hands on them and abuse them. So I was probably I say probably, but I was definitely a helicopter mom. Hi, my name is Keeya. I'm a recovering helicopter mom. I was her, because I really didn't want them to hurt. I could never imagine them suffering the pain that I did. I wanted them to be okay and to look up to me. But over time, I began to share with them what I had been through. By now, they're teenagers, and I'm like, they can handle this. And they became my most intimate support system, along with my husband and other family and other friends. And so I went from being terrified of sharing what had happened to me to where I began to embrace the fact that I had to tell this story. I had to connect with other victims. I had to help them. I had to connect with survivors. I had to let them know that there's someone else out here. And no, it's not easy. And yes, I have battle scars. But we can make it. We don't have to be destroyed because of the things that happen to us. We can make it. And so now, that's why I'm sitting here today. I feel grateful now that I get to touch the lives of people just like me who had experienced things too difficult to tell the average person. People who battle through shame just to do normal things. People who have mental health challenges because of the abuse that they experienced. Now I get to walk arm to arm and link arms with other survivors and other allies who understand and know the importance of child safety and protection, of helping people start their lives over again and get all of the resources that they need. And so that is the reason why I believe I was created by God, to be that person, not anyone's savior. I can't rescue anybody. That job has already been taken. But I can identify with what they're going through a little bit. I really feel people need to understand that it's closer than you think. If you would type up human trafficking in your city, I don't care how rural the city or how busy and big the city, it is happening. As I began to research, why is this a $150 billion industry? It is second to the drug trade. This is the number 2. And I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't eclipse it, the drug trade. But it's the number 2 crime against humanity and organized crime operation that's going on in the world. And it's not just happening to poor people, to immigrants. Yes, there are statistics out there. There's low-hanging fruit. Anytime you have wars, you have poor people, people who are strung out on drugs. Yes, there are situations that are going to take place, and human trafficking is going to take place, and prostitution is going to take place, and so many other ills. But what about the girls that Epstein trafficked? They were the cream of the crop. Going to the highest bidder, they were the cream of the crop. So this situation, it touches many more lives than was once imagined. And so I feel like rather than think, oh, this couldn't happen to my child, rethink that. So when you think of child safety, when you think of human safety, when you think of college students and those who are in high school or elementary or preschool, think of predators, right? They don't discriminate by classism. Abuse can happen to anyone. Human trafficking can happen to anyone. And so I think that's another misconception. There's this stereotype that the pimp is wearing a bright orange suit. He's a black guy. He's got this long chain, and just think black exploitation films. Okay, he's got this look. Or okay, let's bring it up. I'm telling my age. Let's bring it up. Let's think. We're thinking Snoop Dogg here. We're thinking that's definitely what a pimp looks like, right? But we don't think about the cases where the 15-year-old girl who's the leader of her cheerleading squad is going to parties and has been threatened and is recruiting other girls at the school to go to parties and take pictures that are being uploaded to the internet for payment. And then they're finding out who this individual is, and she's going to jail because she is part of a trafficking ring. It doesn't look like a stereotype per se, even though those who fit the mold sometimes are perpetrators, but also they're politicians. I'm not just making this up. This has been all over the news. The Epstein case was huge, all over the news. Entertainment, all these different industries, it's happening all over the world. It looks different parts of the world. You might go to one part of the world in Southeast Asia somewhere, and their family has a debt, and the only way that they could satisfy that debt is to give a few of their children into the hands of pimps. There's corrupt governments, there's corrupt individuals, but it also can happen in your backyard. And so one of the things that was crazy to me was the boom of human trafficking during the pandemic. So people were scratching their head like, how is this booming? The internet. People were sheltering in place with their abusers. And so human trafficking didn't stop. Prostitution didn't stop just because people were getting sick. They just had to find another means to figure out how to get their clients served. I don't know if they were wearing a mask or if it mattered, but it didn't stop. It got worse. And so now I do workshops training the different ways that this happens because, yes, your child is doing a whole lot more than you know on the internet. And they are susceptible because people are now pretending. It's not just happening. This has been going on for a very long time. But people are pretending to be other people with their profiles. And they are targeting young people, old people, whoever they can, to do whatever they can to trap someone into. It doesn't even have to happen physically. They can just send pictures and videos, upload them to the dark web, and somebody is making money off of your child who thinks that they are having this experience with an individual who is not who they say they are. Everything that I'm saying can be proven with court cases, and there's been a lot of attention that has been paid to how this is really happening. And so I feel that people need to do the research and figure out just how close it is. And it's not so you could be terrified, it's so you can be prepared and equipped as much as possible. And so that you can stop thinking because I live in the suburbs, so you can stop thinking because I live in a high rise, so you can stop thinking because, we're just not those type of people, that people are not being sold. The people who are being sold to people who look just like you, however you look. Some have careers, some have really great things that they do in the community, but they have a secret pastime. They're hiring prostitutes. I live in Dallas. About 400 youth every night who are homeless are living on the street. And they are surviving because of whoever will open up the car door, take them to a motel, and they are doing whatever it takes to survive for the night. Let that sink in. That's one way it looks. There are people who, like me, just trying to get out of a bad situation. I was just ripe for the picking. It looks very different. Very different for different people. But it deserves attention. And we deserve to have the right information to protect our families.